Hi, my name is Sameh Al-Jifdi, and this is my author discussion. Today I'll be doing it on Malcolm X or Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz. And we're just going to go ahead and get right into this. And so I'm just going to start off with just a brief summary about Malcolm Little. Malcolm X was born as Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska, May 19th, 1925, the child of Earl Little and a Reverend Baptist minister and activist, and Lois Little. He grew up fatherless after a suspected targeted hit by white supremacists under the KKK. They were called the Black Legion. That left his father dead in the street. And the effect of Earl Little's death was so profound upon Malcolm's mother that she had to be committed to Kalamazoo State Hospital, where she remained for nearly 3 decades before Malcolm and his siblings managed to have her released. Lois would live the rest of her life with her family residing in Michigan. And a little backstory about Malcolm himself now. Malcolm Little did well in school, even after being kicked out at one point when he was sent to a juvenile detention home where he was treated well, but more like a pink poodle, according to the website Malcolm X. And Malcolm eventually wound up attending Mason High School, where he did exceptionally well, setting a good example as he was one of the few African Americans attending the school. He had done so well in school that he'd been elected class president and held high hopes of becoming a lawyer in the future, until one day his English teacher told him to become a carpenter instead. Discouraged from receiving an education, Malcolm dropped out a year later and went to live in Boston with his sister, where he initially worked as a shoe shiner. And a few years later, he ends up being acquainted with some unsavory characters, leading to his arrest and on the charges of larceny. It's during this period in prison where he begins to fill his mind with literature, trying to catch up on what he had missed from dropping out of school. And he later joins the Nation of Islam, a group of proud African-American Muslims who believe that the only way to truly be free and attain equality was to form an independent state separate from the whites. This is the moment Malcolm Little becomes Malcolm X, a man committed to cast off the shackles of racism. And with militant proposals, he increased his following, and the military proposals increased the followings of Malcolm X. And Malcolm's time with the Nation of Islam ended in 1964, and he set off to do Hajj after that in the same year. That's the most spiritual journey in Islam, and converted to Islam, as well as his name, to Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, roughly translating to the mighty king, with the honorific of Al-Hajj, who typically we would refer to somebody who is well-versed in Islam or in the Quran as Hajj, or it's somebody who commands your respect. And after completing Hajj, Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz completely changed his ideology, hoping for a peaceful revolution. However, his life was cut short due to his assassination the following year. So we're just going to go on to this next one. And so here I have a little chronological ordering of Malcolm Little's life. Let me just go ahead and I'll lower that down there. So 1925, born in Omaha, Nebraska. 1931, his father's killed by the white supremacists. 1940, he drops out of school and goes to Boston to live with his half-sister. And in this period, 1946 to 1952, he becomes involved in criminal activity, sentenced to a decade in jail, serves 6.5, and he's released with a new view on life and a new purpose. 1950 to 1960, this is when he begins to campaign for the Nation of Islam, bringing more followers to the cause. And I know these ones overlap a little bit, but he was in that transition state between prison and being an activist and with this freedom, excuse me. And then in 1964, we have Malcolm, who has a falling out with the leader of the Nation of Islam due to his faltering belief in the leader. The leader, I believe, had multiple children out of marriage, out of wedlock. And Malcolm saw this as hypocritical, as that's against Islam. You only have children within wedlock. And so this causes Malcolm to lose faith in the and this organization, the leader, and this sets him off on his own path to go to Hajj for himself. And this is when he defines his new philosophy and his new ideology and protesting methods, so to say. And this very last thing here is the assassination of Malcolm X. And just really quickly on my phone, I have a few notes that I wanted to share, mostly because, why might I be talking about, Malcolm's father being killed by white supremacists? And the reason I added his father's death into the timeline is because understanding who Malcolm's father was is absolutely required. This man was a Baptist minister, as well as a chapter president of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which I had spoken about in some depth at the beginning. And Malcolm's family was heavily invested in the civil rights movement. This is something that both his mother and father were a part of. His mother was a secretary for the Marcus Garvey movement, the very first nationalist organization for African Americans within America. And so we really understand that not only are his parents activists, but they're very powerful activists. They have say, and they're working for big organizations, and they're truly trying to make a change. And that's really it's really interesting to see Malcolm follow down the path of his parents, especially being left fatherless, and his mother was sentenced to live out almost 26 years. She was in a mental state hospital. So for him to go down the same path without their influence upon his life so much is extremely interesting and extremely important. And so we're going to go back to, we're going to go to this. And really quickly, before I go into further depth about who Malcolm X was and his role in Black nationalism, I just want to describe what Black nationalism was. And that's the belief that Black people are a race and that it maintains a Black racial and national identity. This is just the movement for the improvement of African Americans within the United States. Malcolm X advocated through the years 1953 to 1964 of Black nationalism. He wanted to maintain Black independence, but also integrate African American people into the mainstream American culture. Malcolm initially felt that the only way this was possible would be through violence, which really put him on the opposite end of the spectrum as Martin Luther King Jr. However, as we spoke about after Hajj, his views really changed, making a almost complete 180. And he believes that Black nationalism, he still believes in it and he still believes in his cause. However, he doesn't believe in obtaining it within the same way. He wants nonviolent protests after Hajj, and he still wants the African Americans of this period to take it upon themselves to do this, instead of allowing whites to lobby for them and whites to move this along as they pleased, per se. And so we're going to go on to a little bit more about Black nationalism. So Malcolm X first entered this scene in 1953 after his release from prison and his entrance into the Nation of Islam, the Black nationalist group. Later, after his abandonment of the group due to his disagreement with the leader, as well as accusing the leader of hypocrisy, which we'd spoken about, Malcolm would complete Hajj and come back with new fundamental ideas about African American advancement. Again, made almost a complete turn in ideology that what he had previously stated, and believes that no lives had to be lost, no wars had to be fought, and no violence would have to be committed for the progression of Black nationalism within the United States. And we have some more about the Nation of Islam, just because the Nation of Islam was really a pivotal point for Malcolm X to get into the activist scene. Again, gets into it 1953. The group was founded by Wallace Fard Muhammad and later headed by Elijah Muhammad. And the group believed that Christianity was solely for white people, and that the only way to advancement of the African American cause was through Islam and not Christianity. They believed that through maintaining their identity, that they could create a separate community and gain freedom. And through Malcolm X, this movement gave millions of followers. I saw varying numbers, 500,000. I saw once, I saw millions, just really different sources gave me different things. However, through this movement, Malcolm X, gained these millions of followers. And by the time Malcolm had abandoned the cause, he had nearly 500,000 followers. And it's just, this is his stepping point into activism. And this is his entrance into this world. On the left here, we have, I believe this is Fard Muhammad, Wallace Fard Muhammad. I could be wrong. I think this might be the most current leader. Not Elijah, but I don't know his name in particular, unfortunately. And here we just have some photos of just Malcolm X. Not this one. This one is of the Civil Rights Act of 1968 being signed. I believe that's Lyndon B. Johnson, MLK. I'm not sure who the rest of these men are. Just a pivotal moment, and we'll get to the politics later on. Here's a photo of Malcolm X getting out of his car, police staring down at him. And we're gonna be speaking about one of these influential speeches that Malcolm X had, this one being called The Ballot or the Bullet. Let's go ahead. I have one open here, but we'll close that one. Let's go ahead full screen, remove that, and skip this. And so, let's see if I get the volume here, and we're gonna go to 50 seconds.
So today, Islam is my religious philosophy. My political, economic, and social philosophy is Black nationalism. You and I, as I say, if we bring up religion, we'll have differences, we'll have arguments, we'll never be able to get together. But if we keep our religion at home, keep our religion in the closet, keep our religion between ourselves and our God. But when we come out here, we have a fight that's common to all of us against the enemy who is common to all of us. Whether you are a Christian or a Muslim or a nationalist, we all have the same problem. They don't hang you because you're a Baptist, they hang you because you're Black.
And that's just a part of his influential speech. I do have a few notes on this one, but I'll get to that later on. And it's just a really important speech, you know. He wants to separate religion from the cause, which I believe is really important. You know, religion is something that divides. You know, seen more recently than ever, religion isn't more of a unifying thing within the United States. It's more of a you know, a point of controversy, of fighting, and that's not what Malcolm X understood. You know, he knew that with having a different religion, people would be alienated from him. You know, people would maybe lose belief in what he created and what he championed, and he understood that the only way forward would be through understanding the one common that everybody had together was that they were African American, and that they weren't being killed because of their religion. They weren't being killed because of anything other than the sole fact of their skin color. And again, I'll speak more about that later. And some of the political ramifications of the ballot or the bullet, as he continues speaking later on, we see that he states that if Lyndon B. Johnson was really for African Americans or for the cause, he would go to the Senate and he would make change happen, and he would advocate for things to be changing himself, and that the sooner he did that, the better. And if he really truly wanted to make a change, he would make it obvious. And so that's where the term ballot or the bullet comes. Either Lyndon B. Johnson is elected and things start to change, or, you know, violent reformation might have to come to light. So we see Lyndon B. Johnson would go on to win that election of 1964 against Barry Goldwater. It was a champion of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which made it illegal to discriminate based on color, race, sex, national origin. This later comes to include perceived sex or self-identifiers. In 1965, Johnson would also sign the Voting Rights Act, allowing African Americans to vote. And so Lyndon B. Johnson really pushed for these things to happen. He was a supporter of these, and especially the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It wasn't proposed by him; it was proposed by Kennedy. However, after Kennedy's assassination, Johnson made sure that it happened. And so, for the current themes, we're looking at, Black Lives Matter. Nothing gets more current than Black Lives Matter. It's a social political movement so powerful it rocked the nation to its core. Years of police brutality and multiple deaths of African Americans to the hands of white cops sparked a movement that put cities in a standstill. Lots of protesting, lots of calls for justice, for reformation, for action. And while Malcolm did not initially believe in nonviolent protests, near the end of his life, Al-Hajj absolutely did. And it was a vocal point of America is the first country that can have a bloodless revolution. And the BLM protests led to some rioting and deaths during the rioting. However, Malcolm X, he understood this. He understood that, he preached these risks and he understood those risks. And some of the deaths did come from the actual protesting. It was due to cops shooting rubber bullets into the crowds, one protester being struck in the head. I don't believe I know what happened to him. I remember reading he was in critical condition. And most of the deaths did come from the rioting that came as an unfortunate effect of these protests. Rioting was not something that Malcolm X had preached. And another current theme is the election of 2020, the 2020 election. So he can be attributed to the victory of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris against the incumbent President Donald Trump and Mike Pence. The lessons from his speech, the ballot or the bullet, are powerful, and that activists can still apply those words to this election. If politicians were really championing the cause of the African American people, then they should say it and they should show it, and they should show that they intend to do something. And from that, we see that Kamala Harris becomes the first woman to be vice president, as well as the first African American to be the vice president of the United States. We're seeing change. We're seeing politicians willing to make change and willing to, break down old biases and move forward, progress towards a more equal future, a more positive future. And through that, Kamala Harris is a role of that. And while discrimination and race still play heavy roles in American society today, it's a very divided, very polar country currently. There's still progress being made. And to reach that ultimate goal of true equality, progress needs to be constantly made, never stopped, never slowed down. And while it might seem that progress is being slow due to the BLM riots, the death of George Floyd, the death of Ahmaud Marbury, Breonna Taylor, multiple, even throughout the years, more and more people being killed at the hands of white cops. Change is happening, revolution is happening, and at the end of the day, something is being progressed towards and not regressed. So I believe we have one more, and I really like this slide. It's three different type of people. Malcolm went through three different phases, three completely different people. The first one, Malcolm Little, a boy born in Omaha to an activist mother and father, extremely spirited at school and extremely intelligent. And he reaches his first turning point, a teacher telling him to be realistic, to be a carpenter, don't be a lawyer, do what life requires you to be a carpenter, you won't make it as a lawyer. And that really sets him down a new path now, to becoming Malcolm X. A boy had just been released from prison for larceny and had begun his activist career within the Nation of Islam. He promoted Black nationalism at whatever it cost him, through violence, through protests, through whatever means possible in order to obtain equality and to advance the Black nationalist movement. And finally, we come to the third version of Malcolm Little, Malcolm X. Malcolm, he becomes Al-Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, the most enlightened he ever became, I believe. He's changing his views to more closely match Islam. And he believed in nonviolence, and that what he previously said still held true. However, the main of obtaining it would not be through violence, it would be through nonviolence. He obtains a point of view more similar to MLK now. It's extremely disheartening to see that this very final stage that we see Malcolm get to is cut short by his assassination. Here's a photo of Malcolm praying, and this is a photo of Malcolm in, excuse me, Mecca. Let's see what else. And here's my biography, citations. And I believe that is all, except I do have one note here. And so more on the ballot or the bullet speech, and it just talks about the inequalities given to Americans during that period and the ineffectiveness and unwillingness of the government to do anything to stop hate crimes. In this particular clip, Al-Hajj specifies his religion, and that while he may not be Christian or anymore like other prominent Black nationalist leaders like his father had been, religion had no effect on his political and societal beliefs. He wanted to ensure that everyone was on the same page regarding Black nationalism and the importance of unity within the Black community to advance these movements, to make sure that change was being committed, and that everybody, you know, was coherent and stayed together, cohesion and stayed together. He wanted to tell his followers that if Lyndon B. Johnson was really in favor of the African Americans, he would do it, he would make it known. And he did make it known. Johnson did eventually make it known with the Act of 1964, as well as in 1965, the Voting Rights Act. And that completes my author discussion. Stop sharing, and we're gonna